1 p.m. Central Time. So let's go ahead and get started. Um, Today, in our Take Flight Financial Wellness series, we're going to be talking about money and travel, planning an affordable getaway without debt. Everybody needs to go on vacation. Last thing you need to be doing is not relaxing, but worrying about how you're going to pay for it when you get back. We're fortunate to have Matt Reeves, one of our financial advisors here at Alaris, as our main presenter. My name is Brian Moore. I will be your host today. I'm a senior relationship manager and retirement specialist. My colleague Jennifer Louie will be our moderator today. She also is a senior relationship manager and retirement specialist. So before we get started, let's go over some house cleaning tips. First off, you're going to notice that you're going to be muted during this session. You will be able to ask questions and you can do that by submitting through the Q&A. As you can see on the bottom left-hand side, or right-hand side, excuse me, you see the 3 dots there in that circle. If you click on that, the Q&A board will open up and you could submit your questions through that. Jennifer will be monitoring those and we'll be answering those questions and addressing those questions at the end of the program. Also, some tips with WebEx. I'm not familiar how familiar you are with WebEx, but if you need to change your display, you can do that by clicking on that little file icon up on the right-hand side top. You can change your display. And also, if you need to make changes to your audio, you'll see on the bottom left-hand side in that circle, you have a mute button there. You can adjust your audio there if you need to. And then we also have, this is going to be recorded. You can look at it at your leisure if you'd want to. At our Take Flight registration, you can register for our next upcoming meetings. Our next meeting will be April the 15th. It's going to be talking about financial basics for graduates and young adults. The recording, if you want to see the recording, you can go down to the very bottom of this section on the webinar, and you can click on webinars on demand, and you can see the past webinars if you'd like to. We also are going to ask if you wouldn't mind at the end of this presentation, if you would provide us, we're going to be sending out a short survey for you. If you can fill that out and send that back to us, we would truly appreciate it. Your feedback gives us knowledge on how to enhance these presentations, or if you have a presentation that you'd like to see, maybe give us some suggestions on what you'd like to hear from us. With that being said, let's talk about the agenda. So some of the things we're going to talk about, well, actually Matt, who's our main presenter, is going to be talking about, will be understanding the true costs of debt-funded travel. Also planning ahead so your money works best for you. Smarter booking strategies and flights and destinations. I thought this one's pretty interesting. When I saw that, I never knew about this stuff. I'm interested in hearing what Matt has to say. And keeping travel costs predictable. Simple next steps and action plans. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Matt. Thank you, Matt, for presenting this for us.
Excellent job. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Jennifer, for joining. Looks like we have quite a few attendees. So guys, I do encourage you to go ahead and use the Q&A function. We are going to be, like Brian said, taking some questions at the end here. I'm really excited to share a lot of what I have here today. The reason I'm excited is because I actually use these tools a lot. I'm somebody that actually absolutely loves traveling. Furthermore, my wife loves to travel, so I got to stay on my toes, and I've got to, really dig deep to find exactly what sort of tips and strategies that even I personally can utilize, just so that we're not, funneling into debt, right? And we're not compounding our costs, as we'll see here shortly. Special shout out to my wife; she is an attendee on this call, so I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit so she can actually see how it is that we're able to afford such nice travel. So one of the ways that, we're going to talk about, the traps of financing travel, I like to call this the financial hangover, right? And, we all think travel is extremely important. It broadens horizons, right? It can make you a better person. It can help you understand different aspects of the entire world that we live in. But what a lot of people fail to do is they fail to plan ahead. So they get inspired to take a trip and, they put it on a credit card and they're like, okay, well, I'll be responsible. I won't just pay the minimum payment. I'll pay off that figurative $3,000 trip in a single year. Well, let's just take a closer look at what that actually takes. So to clear that $3,000 total trip in 12 months on a credit card, typically with about 25% annual interest charge, you really have to commit to a strict $285 plus payment for every single month for an entire year. That's almost a car payment, right? Or maybe half a car payment these days. But even paying it off what you think is aggressively over a 12-month period, you're still handing the credit card company an additional $422 in just interest payments for that 12 months. For a lot of people, that $422, that can be the cost of groceries for a month, right? Or even if you're looking at it through a travel lens, it might be an extra couple of nights at a nice hotel, and that's just entirely wasted because you just simply paid interest to the credit card company. So if you can afford, that $285 payments after the trip, well, then we could probably realistically save $285 per month before that trip. So that's really going to allow us to keep that $422 in our pocket and allow you to enjoy your time off much more stress-free.
So Matt, this is kind of what I was talking about is, vacations going away is for relaxation. Last thing you want to do is be thinking about how am I going to pay this $3,000 off when I get back home. And I'm sure you have some tricks up your sleeves that you're going to share with us.
Yeah. So, kind of a natural segue, right? Let's look at flipping that script. And the last thing we want to do is be on vacation and think about, I just committed to almost $300 per month for the next 12 months. And that's not even considering any additional travel I might want to do in the next 12 months. So, let's plan ahead. Let's be a little bit more proactive. What does that look like, right? So how about instead of paying $285 after the fact to a credit card company, that's charging you interest for borrowing their money, why don't we sort of bank on our own, right? We can become our own bank by saving that exact same $285 per month for the 12 months before we go on vacation, right? So we're going to save $3,421. And if you're in somewhat of a high yield figurative type of savings account, you can earn about 4% interest, right? Sort of a figurative line there. Now, if you're saving that money and the bank is adding interest to your savings every single month, the bank will actually pay you $63 instead of you paying the bank 422. So now instead of just a $3,000 travel budget, we have almost a $3,500 travel budget, right? And that chart shows it pretty well here, right? We're going to be saving each month. So our balance is going to go up and the bank is going to add a little bit of interest so that by the time we reach month 12, it's basically a free $63 that can go toward even upgrades in your travel experience. So just by planning ahead and saving ahead of time, we can really flip the script on exactly how it is we control and experience our travel.
So Matt, my family and I, we do a lot of our vacation here in the local area. We don't take flights very often. I do fly a lot for work, but these next couple of pieces that you're going to share with us, I thought they were really extremely interesting to see coming from somebody who travels a lot because I can use these tools in the future when I do book flights with my family.
Sure. And I think everyone will take away a little piece from this is that not only with paying interest to banks, right, credit card borrowing, and then obviously the better alternative, which is saving, that's how you can avoid that financial hangover. But how do we make our stress or our money, stretch a little bit further? And that's just by being a little bit agile and smart in how we book flights, right? Now, this is a little bit more toward the person who has a rigid schedule, right? Maybe you have kids in school that have their spring break, their winter break, their summer break, and you have to kind of plan around those types of things, right? Well, in that case, you really have to be early. So what I like to do in that case is, I use a free tool like Google Flights. This is not necessarily a big commercial for Google Flights or anything like that. It's just one of the tools that I typically like to use because it is free to use. They don't have a bunch of ads and pop-ups, but it is one of those nice things that makes it pretty easy to search multiple airlines. But if you know that, when your schedule is rigid and you want to take a spring break trip, for instance, that's about 12 months from now. So what you can do is, between 5 to maybe 7 months in advance of your trip, I like to use the flight price tracker. And it's a little obscure. You can kind of see it here in this red circle. But anytime you look up a specific flight route, and in this case, it's, from Minneapolis to Seattle, totally figurative here. But if you did want to track the prices for an exact date and exact destination from your home airport, it's a really cool tool because Google Flights will actually email you when that price either goes up or down significantly. So that way you can be a little bit more tactical and when you actually want to book the flight in order to try to save a little bit of money on it. Another tool I really, really like with Google Flights is, maybe you weren't necessarily sold on a specific destination. Maybe you know exactly what sort of time frame you want to travel in, but you're open to ideas in terms of destination. Well, you can use the Explore tab in a very similar way. And so I just made our home airport here in Minneapolis. If you are exploring different destinations from Minneapolis, you would set that here. I know it's a little tiny to see, but you can set your home destination and then you can essentially put anywhere as your destination as long as you have those rigid dates in mind, right? Keep in mind for somebody that has kids in school or a busy season during work, you know exactly what sort of travel dates you can pull off. But in this case, from August 7th to August 12th, we did find this Seattle flight for a family of four with four carry-on bags. Total trip price for flights was about $1,300. So, just kind of keep in mind to be a little bit more tactical when you are looking to book flights, especially if you know basically what sort of travel season is most accommodative to you.
So Matt, you mentioned this is more for people who are more on a rigid schedule or know an exact week that they plan on going. What about those people who are just doing it on a whim or a lot more flexible? What type of tools do you have that you can share with us for those type of people?
Yeah, not to make anyone jealous of those with flexible schedules, right? We all have to, kind of follow the rules of life how they're set out for us. But, if you do have a bit more flexibility, right? Maybe, you work nursing shifts, right? Or you have a flexible floating holidays, don't have kids in the school system yet, right? If that's you, you really have a kind of a cheat code for budget travel. First, what I try to encourage people to do is utilize shoulder seasons, right? So that's kind of opposite from, that person that does have that rigid vacation schedule. But shoulder seasons are really times on either side of the most popular travel period, like spring break, winter holiday season, or summer vacation, right? So even if, you can try to book your travel, even just like a week or two on either side of the busy season, hence why they're called shoulder seasons, it can actually save you a pretty significant amount of money, especially on lodging and flight for sure. One of the second tip I have for you here is, really the 48-hour type of shift, right? Simply moving your departure from a Friday to something like a Tuesday or a Wednesday can oftentimes cut your airfare costs significantly. Um, Lastly, what I like to do, I kind of mentioned it a little bit there, but if you're both flexible with your time and also your destination, right? If you're just looking for a little inspiration, that same Explore tool, inside of Google Flights is a really, really fun tool to play with because you can essentially say, here's my home airport. I'm open to going anywhere, and I am open for a 1 or 2 week trip even for the next 6 months, right? You can find some really, really steep deals on that. For instance, here, I found from Minneapolis to Dublin, Ireland, uh, nonstop flight with a carry-on a good airline like Delta is $500 basically per person. So again, if you are like somebody that has a more flexible schedule, somebody that can kind of just drop what you're doing and take a flight, maybe work remotely, maybe work half-time remotely, whatever it might be, you, like I said, do have a little bit of an advantage, and it's, not at the expense of anyone with a more rigid schedule for sure.
So $505 for a flight to Dublin from Minneapolis. I pay a heck of a lot more than that when I travel to the East Coast to do business. So these tools are definitely very useful by the looks of things. What do you have for different type of destination, lodging ideas, things of that nature?
Yeah, great segue. So, when it comes to how you want to craft your vacation, everyone's different, right? I particularly do love the all-inclusive experience, right? It's something that you don't really have to stress about. there's little to no surprise expenses. Your food and drink are obviously included. Much easier to plan and budget for. But you're not going to find that everywhere you go, right? And so if you are somebody that, is maybe a little bit more adventurous, you want to explore a little bit more versus more, on resort focused type of travel, maybe then, if you have possibly a larger group, take a look at things like Airbnb or VRBO, right? Some of those short-term vacation home rentals. It's nice because everyone's together, right? You have a kitchen, you have laundry, everyone's got their own bedroom, you're not sharing hotel rooms, etc. So if that's something that is attractive to you, I would make use of that. Now, the caveat there is because, your dining and your meals, etc., are not included in your total price. Let's be a little smart on how we actually plan for these things, right? If your vacation home rental has a kitchen, well, make a stop at a local grocery store, pick up food for especially breakfast, right? Everyone's kind of getting ready, rummaging around. Pretty quick and easy to whip up some breakfast burritos for everybody, so they're held over until at least lunch. And if you want to take it a step further, maybe pack a couple of sandwiches for people as you go out. Maybe you're going to be out milling around, busy, seeing some landmarks, etc. You know, being able to pull out a sandwich from a cooler is a lot more economical than sitting down for a $35, $40 lunch. But everyone's a little different, just kind of keeping these things in mind in terms of freeing up more of your budget for additional experiences or maybe upscaled or upgraded dining options for the evenings.
So Matt, I know that when we look at travel, most of us look at what's the flight cost going to be, what's the car rental going to be, what's the lodging going to be, but there are some other costs out there that really doesn't come front to mind. I mean, we don't think about those, so probably some things we need to pay attention to, right?
Yeah, great point, right? And it's one thing that for us, trying to be as proactive as possible, planning ahead for your travel can really, really be a huge benefit. But it's not to say that you won't incur some surprise expenses. And so here's some tips on how to try to minimize or even avoid them altogether, right? What we look at obviously with flying is that when you're talking about maybe taking a trip for four people and, everybody has way too much stuff that they want to pack, right? Well, I know it's not always possible. Let's just try as much as we can to utilize, some of those free carry-on baggages versus, paying $70 plus round trip for check baggage, right? For a family of four, that can easily add about $300 to your total trip cost, right? Now, another thing is make sure your bags, if you are going to check a bag, are under the weight limit. I know that's for a seasoned traveler pretty easy, but for somebody that is got a lot going on, trying to pack for a bunch of kids, you're trying to prepare as much as you can. Some of those things can kind of slip under the radar. I would always recommend investing in one of those just cheap, simple luggage scales. My wife and I have one. We use it religiously. Every time we pack bags, it's the first thing we do. We grab that hooked luggage scale and we make sure that we're under the weight and pay special attention to each airline. Each airline actually has their own real rules for weight on your checked bag. So that can also catch people by surprise. So the last thing I want for anybody on this call is to be that person at the check-in counter that's opening up their bag and rifling through stuff to put it in a carry-on because they're slightly overweight. So yeah, definitely invest in a $10 to $15 luggage scale, and it'll save you a lot of time, effort, and headache, money as well in the long run. For airports especially, I mean, nothing at an airport is cheap anymore. Even like a bag of M&Ms, it might be like $6, right? So I would always tell people before you get to the airport, try to have a meal, maybe make something at home. Just save yourself that $35 cheeseburger that you're probably not going to be all that satisfied with anyway. And also bring empty water bottles. You can definitely bring an empty water bottle through TSA, your security check, and just fill it up after you get through security, right? So that way you can avoid buying the $6 bottle of Dasani, at the airport vendor. Um, I have a dog and a cat. For a long time, I had a couple of dogs, right? And so travel surrounding who's going to visit and take care of the pets and how they're going to be looked after is is a pretty big consideration. So the last thing we want is for last minute to go, oh man, I forgot to secure boarding or a pet sitter, for the time that we're going to be gone. So keep that in mind early in your planning, right? When we're talking about budgeting and saving monthly for the 12 months preceding your travel, make sure to include something like that in your costs as well.
You mentioned earlier in the presentation that you kind of compared a fixed rigid schedule to more of a more flexible schedule. So what kind of thoughts do you have for somebody who might be just planning on something on the whim?
Yeah, planning something on the whim can actually be pretty beneficial too. Even more obscure, you can do standby flights. You can do, basically just walking up to the ticket window in some cases, as crazy as that sounds, you can get some pretty deep deals. For somebody that is extremely flexible, even some airlines have introduced programs where you can pay a pretty reasonable annual cost, and you can basically jump on standby flights, within the same day notice. So some of that stuff is pretty more obscure, kind of doesn't apply to maybe everybody on this call, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity out there if you are truly that flexible. So I know one thing that comes up a lot, especially, on an airplane, you even get the flight attendants that walk up and down the aisles and ask if you want to apply for a travel credit card while you're literally on the plane, right? So, this topic can come up quite a bit, and it's a little confusing. It's a tough sort of program to navigate when it comes to credit cards for travel because they'll kind of make it confusing. Some travel credit cards have miles, some have points, some have cash back, and you're kind of like, what does all this mean, right? Now, these can be a pretty powerful tool, but with anything, we want to make sure that we're using these extremely responsibly. We saw at the beginning, the very first slide that I covered, sort of what costs get added to your travel if you are paying overtime by using a credit card. So what we always want to make sure is that if we are utilizing travel type credit cards, maybe we only funnel our necessary spending through those credit cards, right? That's things like groceries, gas, maybe some bills that don't charge, the credit card processing fee. Maybe for money that we were already going to spend, we go ahead and try to funnel that into the travel credit card to accrue those miles or points or cash back. Now, some of the most well-known travel credit cards out there, think of, American Express or even some offerings from like Chase or Capital One, have some really, really high annual fees. And, for some people that have a very high spend relatively, that can be worth it, right, in some cases. But for a majority of people, we want to make sure we steer clear of some of those really, really high annual fees. Um, that just kind of cuts into your travel budget at the end of the day if you're having to give money back to the credit card company, right? Similar to paying interest. Now, if you are funneling necessary expenses, right, you can rack up some hotel, points. You can do miles or cash back, like we mentioned there. But what I always tell people with those points is, don't just accumulate them and sit on them. Um, it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but there's really two main reasons for that. Credit card companies, I don't remember the last time any one of them has come out and said, hey, we've made our travel points even more valuable, right? They're always getting devalued, right? The programs are always changing. There's always new fine print that comes out. And number two, there's no growth mechanic to those points. You can't earn interest on those points. You can't invest them or anything, right? So as soon as you accumulate enough to, help you pay at least for in part of some of your travel expenses, I definitely encourage you to use those. But just to reiterate, number one golden rule with a bullet is pay the balance to zero every single month. The moment you pay any interest on a credit card for travel, really it just devalues everything that you've done there, right? Now, like I mentioned, some of these travel credit card rewards programs can be a little complex. One tool that we won't really cover in huge detail today that I personally love is a free website called pointsya.com. Uh, I have no affiliation, but it's a free to use website. But what it allows you to do is actually tell the site which credit card point program that you have, and that website will actually return results to you in order to most effectively use those points. And you can even sort the results in terms of how much bang for your buck the points will go. For instance, if 15,000 credit card points, figuratively, result in about $150 in cash value, you may be able to use those 15,000 points to book a hotel room that the cash price might be 300, even $400, right? So some of those tools out there in terms of something like Points Yeah can help you stretch those points even further and really allow you to redeem them at a much higher rate.
Hey man, let's say that my wife and I had a horrible week, and that we need to go someplace, recharge for a few days, just so we can face life again. You got any suggestions for that?
Oh, 100%. So, travel comes in all shapes and sizes, and it's different for everybody. What I love to do is the power of the microcation. And, my wife and I, we're pretty blessed. We live in Arizona. We're not too far of a drive from some pretty stunning places, right? We can think about going to Sedona to Flagstaff. If you're a history buff and you love Westerns, we can go to Tombstone, that's a few hours away. Even some of the national parks up in Utah. So pretty spoiled in that regard for myself. But, for everybody where you're at, you always have something to do that's within at least somewhat of a short drive, right? And I think for a lot of people that do have that rigid schedule, try to sneak out of the office, see if it's okay with your boss, if you can take an extra day off around a holiday even, right? Turn that 3-day holiday weekend into a 4-day weekend, right? And take a short trip to a regional destination. And really all that does, Brian, great point, is just kind of lowers the barrier to entry for needing to get away, right? Um, what I always say in that case is, just because it is more of a microcation doesn't mean we can't follow the same lodging and dining strategy that we outlined before, right? Maybe you are going to do an Airbnb, or maybe you'll do a hotel. If you can get a free continental breakfast, that sounds pretty good deal to me. So, just kind of keep some of those things in mind. Make your breakfast, try to make your lunch, and then upgrade your dining for maybe the evenings. Um, yeah, like one of the ways that my wife and I like to kind of do that, we can even drive to Vegas, which is 4 hours away, right? So we'll get a nice little subsidized hotel room and kind of see the sights. It's a great place to obviously do some people watching. So that is one of the ways that we can enjoy some of the regional vacations that we have. But for people that maybe if it's not a drive, there's a lot of really good flights out there for less than $100 per person, believe it or not. So one of the places I mentioned, Vegas or even San Diego, they have some really good flight schedules, frequent flights, and very low cost. So really, really good point, Brian.
So you have a quote for us, huh?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the late Anthony Bourdain. And we talked a little bit about how travel comes in all shapes and sizes. But he once said, if I'm an advocate for anything, it's to move, as far as you can, as much as you can, across the ocean or even simply across the river. And so that I think distills our talk, in terms of, vacation can be in a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you are somebody that loves the all-inclusive route, if you're somebody that loves the backpacking route, kind of exploring multiple different cities, maybe it's a Europe trip, something like that, or simply go across the river, right? Go and take that microcation, go just unwind for a little bit. But while we do all these things, I think it's just important that we keep in mind that there are tools and resources for us to be able to do these things affordably and not have to stress out about after the fact financing a vacation.
I'm sure you've piqued some interest from some of our guests who have attended today, and what would you suggest for like next steps for them?
Here's a quick action plan, right? Obviously, like I said, travel is for everybody in all shapes and sizes. But, let's be proactive. Let's, for the 12 months preceding our vacation, let's try to open up a simple vacation fund. And that can be a simple investment account. It can be a bank account, right? Just talk to your personal advisor on exactly what that might look like for you. But that vacation fund can be just like we talked about, that $285 per month that just goes into a fund that will allow at least a little bit of growth, but more importantly, will allow you to not have to pay interest to a lender. You can even set up a small automatic payday transfer, meaning that if you have an account that you normally do a direct deposit of your paycheck every single couple weeks, every month, however you want to structure it, you can actually set up an automatic transfer from your normal bank account into your vacation fund, right? So if that's, like we mentioned, 285 a month, if it's 100 a month, if it's 50 a month, right? Every little bit can go on to help you in a pretty major way. Lastly, if you have an aspirational trip, maybe like we talked about, you have, rigid timeline that you have to follow in order when you can take vacation, or if you're flexible, right? But you have that destination in mind. You know, dream big. Go look that up on Google Flights and track the prices, right? Start to see and get a feel for how those prices will move over time and when maybe the most, advantageous time would be to book those types of trips. Have fun, play with it, right? Go use that explore feature. I do it almost all the time, or almost every day. One of the places that my wife and I want to go this year is possibly Thailand. So we're taking a look at that almost every week together, just playing around and dreaming big. So there's no limits to what you can do. It's just we want you to do it in a very smart way.
So the next time my family and I go on a vacation, we actually have to take a flight someplace. You're going to get a phone call from me because I'm going to need help with setting up this Google Flights. I
Yeah,
think
well,
that tool right there is pretty cool. I like it.
as a financial advisor, I have to obviously clear any outside business activities here with Alaris. So, but for this time, Brian, I'll do it free of charge for you. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, thank you, Brian, for some of the input. It's been really great. And of course, everybody, if you have a question, the Q&A function is going to work really well for that. But that basically wraps up my portion here of how to travel more effectively and stick to a budget.
Well, of course, when we do a presentation like this, of course, we also have to do disclosures. So basically, it's just saying that this is just an educational presentation. It's not giving advice of any type. With that being said, this probably be a perfect time to see what kind of Q&As we got. We got any Q&As?
Yeah, we had a few questions come in. So the first one is, if you redeem points for cash, does that have to be reported on taxes?
No, typically not, because they are essentially a sort of dividend from the credit card company. So when you do redeem points for cash, typically that will just be applied to your statement, or you'll receive that in the form of like a gift card, however that ends up shaking out. But no, you don't have to do that because it's essentially listed as like a rebate.
All right. Another one that came in is, what are your thoughts about opening multiple credit cards to get the bonus points?
Yes. So I know it's tempting, right? You'll see those flashy offers, like I mentioned, when you're on an airplane, you can get 80,000 bonus miles from XYZ airline, right? Now, I'm not saying those are bad, they can be good, but again, we go back to that same topic as, can you meet the minimum spend threshold in the amount of time they allow? So typically it's, you have to open the account and spend $3,000 in the first, 90 days, whatever it might be. Can you pull that off by not putting anything on that credit card that you won't pay off immediately, right? Each and every month when the statement comes. If the answer is yes, maybe not such a bad idea, right? But again, be mindful of the annual fee and be mindful of how exactly you can utilize those points and how flexible they really are. So yeah, not a bad idea, but what I would also recommend is not doing a bunch of those applications all at the same time, right? Because that can ding your credit score. Too many inquiries can end up, looking a little bit suspicious to some lenders. So, that can just hurt your chances of getting that next loan or credit card in that case. So just make sure that, if you are going to apply for a credit card that does offer a pretty big welcome bonus, do your research on that beforehand. Don't just do it on a whim.
All right, and just one more, and this is regarding flying. The comment is, the seats are so small. Are there any tricks you have to getting upgraded to business class or comfort class?
Sure. Actually, one of the ways that you can most economically upgrade your travel accommodations, especially on planes where they like to pack you in like sardines, it's borderline inhumane, but one of the best ways you can actually upgrade yourself in that case is actually by utilizing some of those credit card rewards. If you have them, now I wouldn't necessarily say it's worth racking up a bunch of expenses just to get, a slight upgrade in a flight once every 12 months, right? It's kind of one of those give and takes. But if you have them and you're looking for a way to utilize them, typically those upgrades on airlines are going to be where you can stretch those points the furthest. Also with hotel bookings, if you have, getting into the weeds a little bit, but a transfer partner from one of your your credit card reward companies will allow you to redeem their points on, Hyatt or Hilton, whatever, have you. You can typically stretch those points pretty far in that regard as well.
One
All
trick
right.
that I
That
use,
covers our questions.
one trick that I use when I travel for business, of course, I'm not flying first class, is I will try to get the window seat every time because that little extra lean up against the wall
Yeah.
does
Yeah.
make a big difference for me
Yeah,
at least. And
not having to lean against a complete stranger on your left, right?
yeah, exactly. So that tends to work for me.
Right. And even utilizing something like an exit row, it's not that much more in terms of, trying to upgrade that, but at least give you a little bit more leg room, right? Just make sure you're paying attention for the pre-flight instructions from the flight attendant, because if you're not paying attention, they'll actually kick you out of the seat. So I don't have any personal experience with that at all, trust me. But yeah, you just have to be attentive and answer yes in the affirmative that you've heard all of their instructions. But a little bit of extra responsibility. I mean, come on, not like anything's really going to happen, but you can use those exit rows. You can use some of those upgrades if they're available. And I would just recommend going to the actual gate counter and asking, hey, is there any upgrades available? The worst they could say is no, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Do we have any other questions, Jennifer?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, so if we can go on
Awesome.
the next slide. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We truly appreciate you guys coming and joining us for our presentations. If you need to reach out to us with any questions, you can call our customer service center at 800-279-3200, or you can reach us by email by emailing it alaris@alaris.com. Again, we're going to be sending out a short survey for you. If you would please fill that out and send it back to us. We truly appreciate the feedback we can get from our guests. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for Matt for being the presenter, and Jennifer for being our moderator. Truly appreciate it. Thank you, folks.
You're welcome. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jennifer.
Everybody have a great day.
Take care.
Bye.